And well, without anything else to add, we can start with the video. Summary. A mysterious man advises Naruto to stop making jokes and mischief. Naruto will take his shinobi training seriously from a young age and make the most of his potential. A simple low-rank technique will transform into something that will rival even the famous Irasen. Chapter 1. Introduction. Look, brat, you don't understand how strong the yondaime really was. Swearing that you'll get over it is like me saying I get free kisses from Kami-sama herself, the hooded man said. Uzumaki Naruto, the village's scapegoat, glared at the man in front of him. This guy had heard him proclaim that he would surpass his hero, and suddenly, he started harassing him with the stupidity and unreality of his dreams. Naruto looked at the hooded man as if he were a hated enemy. Shut up. I will be the best person there is, and then the villagers will stop hating me, and I will finally be respected. The blonde man shouted indignantly. The hooded man chuckled. That's why you want to beat the yondaime. Why do you want respect? I assure you, boy, even if you become 10 times stronger than Yondaime-sama, you will never be Hokage if you only seek respect, the man said indifferently. Naruto went from being angry to being confused and angry. Oh yeah? Why is that? Naruto shouted defiantly. The man adopted a serious expression, although Naruto couldn't see him. She turned to the blonde young man sitting next to her. Your reasons are selfish. No Hokage would declare you his successor if he knew that you are only looking for respect and attention. To be an Hokage, you must put any resentment towards the people of Konoha behind you, and swear to protect each of the villagers with your life if necessary. The job requires much more than being a powerful ninja. You need a lot of important things to be considered a possible candidate. Naruto was puzzled by the explanation. I had never considered such things. Of course, he was only a child, and also very young, but he believed that to be Hokage, all you needed was power and strength. He never really knew how devastatingly powerful the Hokages were. I just knew that I would take that hat one day, after becoming strong. That was pretty much it. Now that I thought about it more clearly, I easily understood how ridiculous I was being. However, Naruto knew it was possible. Although he resented the villagers for their hatred towards him, he was sure that he could leave it behind once he got the job. However, he always wondered about it. Why did the villagers hate him? It was Naruto's universal question. I had other questions, but that one took the cake. He would stay up at night wondering the reason. But, unfortunately, I never got an answer. Even when she tried to ask the man she considered a foster grandfather, he would only smile at her sadly and tell her that he didn't know. Naruto could be loud and boisterous, but that didn't mean he was stupid. Quite the opposite. I knew that the Sandai Myokai was hiding something. The man let it be seen with his body language that he was lying. Naruto's trust in the man had been slightly diminished when he first asked. The blonde man realized that something was happening behind his back, something that apparently everyone knew but him. The innocent criminal, as Naruto used to be called. The blonde young man forgot his thoughts when the hooded man put the money on the counter to pay for his ramen. The man looked at him for a second and finally turned to leave. Just before he left, the man looked over his shoulder at the young blonde. Remember what I told you, girl? And if you really want to be strong, take it seriously. Act like a ninja and then be a ninja. Don't look for attention. Strive to be strong, the man said. Having said that, the man left the young blonde man with his ramen, deep in his thoughts. Naruto couldn't stop thinking about the advice he had given him. Who was the mystery man? He got up from the stool, paid for his small meal, and walked home. It was getting late, and he couldn't risk running into any suspicious characters at night. It was about the time he had set for bed when he got home. As she finished her preparations and went to bed, she couldn't help but remember her conversation with the mystery man. And what exactly it entailed. 0. The next morning, Naruto enjoyed a very welcome day off from his shinobi teachings. The academy had given the class 2 days off, as they usually did. Remembering his time at the academy, he couldn't help but sigh sadly. So far, his first year was not being the best. Teachers often neglected him. He still could not read, and therefore, whenever he was given homework, he could not complete it to the maximum of his ability. He had asked the Hokage if he could help him learn, but the man was too busy. He gave Naruto some basic knowledge, but it wasn't enough. Of course, teachers were supposed to refine their knowledge and teach him more, but they often found reasons to expel him from the classroom, or simply ignore his pleas for help. Naruto used to forget about his studies when he was constantly ignored and paid them with jokes. He behaved like a clown and did stupid things because, otherwise, no one would listen to him, not even the other children. Naruto was completely alone, and he knew it. He often felt he had nothing to lose. So he didn't mind his reputation being tarnished if it meant people simply acknowledging his existence. However, the mystery man had raised some valid points. Why should you care about attention? Of course I was completely alone, but it mattered. No. His determination was firm as his new goals were forged in his mind. He would strive to gain strength and knowledge, and when he was ready, he would show his strength to the world and earn people's respect. He still refused to forgive anyone, not even the Sandaime, for hiding the information. But he thought he could do it. He would stop trying to get the attention of those who just laughed at him or ignored him. Now he would devote his time to strengthening himself and acquiring knowledge. 0. The first step to achieving his goals, Naruto thought, would probably be to learn to read. The only way to learn to read would be to ask the Hokage. Naruto knew that the man was very busy, but he trusted that the elder Hokage would come up with something. With a new resolution to learn, Naruto discreetly made his way to the Hokage tower. Upon arriving, Naruto noticed that the secretary was timidly working with some papers in front of her. The woman looked at him as Naruto entered the tower and tensed up. I didn't hate Naruto, but I still felt apprehension. Just thinking that the boy harbored the strongest and most evil being ever scared her. She knew that the Hokage had taken a liking to the boy, and that eased her fears of at least being around and talking to him. Hello, Naruto-san. Would you like to talk to Sandaime-sama? The secretary asked. Naruto nodded and smiled at the woman. She realized that she distrusted him a little, but at least she didn't hate him completely. The woman nodded and allowed him to enter. The Sandaime Hokage was tired of his job. Work, oddly enough. One would think that being one of the most powerful shinobi in the world would prepare you for the job of a Hokage. But unfortunately it wasn't like that. The exhausting thing, of course, was his endless amount of paperwork and documentation. He had set out to find a solution, but unfortunately he never found it. He prided himself on being a wise and intelligent fighter instead of a badass fighter, so when he found out that he couldn't find a solution to his problem, it was a severe blow to his pride. The Hokage came out of his thoughts when someone opened the door. Normally, Sarutobi would be angry that someone was so rude as to blatantly walk into his office without even knocking. But when he saw the short blonde boy, he was a little glad instantly. Naruto was the light on a dark day for the elder Hokage. I felt sorry for the boy for everything that had happened. It always hurt him to tell him that he didn't know why the villagers hated him or that his parents died in Kyuubi's attack. And he didn't know who they were. Naruto was so curious about the things he never had, and it hurt him to not even be able to give him a hint of his questions. If someone found out who the boy's real parents were, he would be in constant danger. Sarutobi knew it wasn't fair in the slightest, but he had to keep it a secret. At least until the blonde was mature enough to handle the news, and even then, it might be dangerous to tell him everything for fear of to become hateful to the village and its people, as well as with the same old Hokage. Sarutobi tried to improve his life by enacting laws and trying to give him a decent life, but his plans failed miserably. All the members of the civil council hated the boy with a passion, and some members of the shinobi council were not much better. He could not give the child a decent life because all orphanages refused to house him. Then he had to try to find an apartment complex, although the elder Hokage was reluctant to do so only because of his young age. Saratev and tried to find a decent and well-kept apartment complex, but no owner accepted the young blonde man. She finally found him a home, although it was possibly the worst possible one. The apartment complex I was supposed to live in was run down and about to be demolished. The building was located in the slums of Konoha, and the owner was poor and only allowed the blonde to stay thanks to the money he brought him. There were only 4 apartments in the complex, and only Naruto lived in the building due to its location, and the fact that he lived there made people avoid him at all costs. Sarutobi knew that what had happened to Naruto had been one of his worst mistakes, possibly as serious as letting Orochimaru leave the village. He tried to help the young blonde man whenever he had the opportunity, but his obligations constantly prevented him. The short guy approached his desk with a thoughtful look. "Hi Jiji-san," the blonde murmured. Sarutobi smiled at the young man. "Yes, Naruto-kun, do you need anything?" asked the Hokage. Naruto frowned thoughtfully, trying to figure out the best way to proceed. He finally nodded to himself and looked at the village leader with determination. "Yes, Jiji, I want to. I want you to teach me how to read," Naruto replied firmly. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow at the sight of the blonde. "You can't read anymore, Naruto-kun. The academy instructors were supposed to teach you," Sarutobi replied confused. Naruto nodded. "Yes, but every time I asked them for help, they ignored me or did not help me with what I asked for. They didn't like it there," Naruto said with a frown. The man's face hardened when he found out. He was surprised that the instructors at the academy went so far as to sabotage Naruto's learning. "I should have foreseen that something like this would happen." He sighed as he looked at the blonde young man. "I'm sorry, Naruto. I didn't know they would do something like that. I'll have to find you a tutor to help you catch up," Sarutobi replied. Naruto frowned at the offer of the Hokage. "I don't want a tutor, Jiji-san. They will only do the same as the teachers at the academy," Naruto proclaimed firmly. The elder Hokage sighed as he looked for a way to please the young blonde. "I don't know what else to do, Naruto-kun. I can't teach you because of my obligations. If I could be in 2 places at once to help you," the Hokage abruptly interrupted his response to Naruto upon understanding. "Kajeben-sen." The Hokage smiled complicatedly as he stood up. "I know just what will help you, Naruto-kun," Sarutobi informed. The Hokage clasped his hands in the form of a cross, a sign of a ram. "Kajeben without no jutsu," Sarutobi said quietly. An exact replica of the elder Hokage appeared next to Sarutobi. Jutsu caught Naruto's attention. Naruto watched what had just happened. Shadow clones. I've never heard of such a thing before. He remembered that one of the instructors at the academy had said something about Bunsen no Jutsu. But the technique Naruto saw him perform was called Bunsen no Jutsu, no Kage Bunsen no Jutsu. Naruto wondered if there would be any difference between them. Sarutobi smiled as his clone advanced. "Come with me, Naruto-kun. I'll help you learn to read," the clone proclaimed. Naruto looked at the clone with a raised eyebrow. "How is he going to teach me to read if he's just a Bunsen?" asked the blonde. Both the Hokage and the clone chuckled. "This is a Kajeben-sen, Naruto-kun, not a normal Bunsen," the real Hokage replied. Naruto frowned thoughtfully. "What's the difference?" Naruto asked. "Well, for starters, the Kajeben-sen are solid clones. They can also think and move by themselves, although they only follow the instructions of their creator. The weakness of the technique is that the clones can dissipate quite easily if one receives a blow or a sharp touch, or if they are caught by a blunt, sharp, or jagged object," the thoughtful Hokage explained. Naruto's eyes widened at the end of the explanation of the Hokage. "I was thinking about the uses of that technique. In fact, I could be in 2 places at once." He was about to ask Elder Hokage to teach him the technique, but his common sense was telling him no. The Hokage couldn't teach him a jutsu. To a first-year student at the academy. From what Naruto could deduce from the technique, it was probably a high-level jutsu as well. He decided that he would try to figure out how to do it later. With that, Naruto and the location clone went to another room to help Naruto learn to read. 0-0. Naruto continued this routine with the Hokage clone for 2 months. Every day, after the academy, I went to the Tour del Hokage and spent about 3 hours learning. They studied and practiced reading comprehension and writing. After 2 months, Naruto was finally an expert, and had experience in practicing reading and understanding what he read, as well as writing. He saluted and was surprised at how quickly the young blonde man learned both practices. The elder leader pointed out that Naruto definitely had great potential. The blonde guy learned things quickly and then practiced what he learned without stopping until he mastered the concept. Naruto noticed that Saruto was a good teacher. The old man explained things in a way that simply prompted one to learn what he was trying to teach. It was a good experience for both of us. Naruto also learned a bit more about the shadow clone technique. He discovered after one of his reading sessions with the clone that somehow the real Hokage knew everything the clone and Naruto did. When asked about this, the village leader explained the Kageben Sin-Ende technique. Detail and the fact that it was a technique used mainly for exploration and intelligence. He explained that it could also be used to overwhelm an enemy, but that normally no one used it for that purpose. The Hokage told Naruto that it was a forbidden technique due to the huge amount of chakra it requires. Naruto was stunned to hear about the applications of the technique. Every time he went to the tower to practice reading and writing, he made sure to analyze everything that the Hokage did when executing the technique. He observed the seal used, the way the Hokage chakra seemed to come out of its center, and the way his body tensed when pronouncing the name of the technique. Naruto made sure to write down everything he knew and analyzed about the technique on a spare scroll so he could practice and execute it. Naruto's academic performance did not improve much after learning to read and write correctly. Teachers used to assign him more difficult tasks than others and often refused to help him with difficult tasks. Naruto never gave in to the oppression of the teachers. He made a solemn promise to stand firm despite their taunts and hatred. The teachers often made fun of him for their poor grades on assignments as well as for their poor academic performance. Naruto was trying to think of a way to overcome his problems while heading to the Hokage Tower. The Hokage used to find ways to help him with his problems and was basically the only person who seemed to care, stop or acknowledge it. He made his way to the tower, as he used to do on his days off, and entered the building thoughtfully. The secretary smiled at him as he entered. She had gotten to know the boy a little better and no longer tensed up at the sight of him. He saw how kindly the Hokage treated him and how happy and serene the boy behaved. When he was near the older man, he came to distinguish the boy's fake and forced smiles from those of genuine happiness when he was near the location. The secretary felt a little embarrassed about how she used to look at the guy. He saw that there was no correlation whatsoever between the boy and the QB as far as Naruto's personality was concerned. He felt sad to see how many others seemed to hate the boy. The secretary sighed as she allowed Naruto into the office as usual. The young blonde was just a girl, and having to carry the weight of the demon and the hatred of the villagers was simply unfair. He often considered Yonda and Miokai a great hero, but when he met Naruto, he felt some resentment for having locked the demon in the young orphan girl. I knew there was probably no other option, but I couldn't help myself. It just wasn't fair. 0-0. Saruto and looked thoughtfully at the blonde young man in front of his desk. I don't see why not. You are a student of the academy, and eventually you will learn the techniques. But why don't you try to go to the library instead of asking me? Asked the Hokage. Naruto stared at the Hokage. They won't let me in the library, Naruto replied. The village leader frowned. How cold could his people be? Did they really deserve to be saved if this was how they treated the one who protected them on a daily basis? Sarutobi sighed and nodded. All right, Naruto-kun, I'll give you the training scrolls to perform the 3 basic techniques of the academy, exclaimed the Hokage. Naruto smiled. Also, Gigi, I would like to ask you 4 scrolls explaining the battle scenarios and the theory of the jutsu. Naruto informed while rubbing the back of his neck with one hand and smiling sheepishly. Sarutobi's eyes widened in surprise. What? Battle scenarios and jutsu's theory? The old man thought, confused. Why do you need scrolls on those things, Naruto-kun? Sarutobi asked. Naruto frowned. It's my task. Teachers don't help me, so I wanted to read about her so I could do her right, Naruto replied. The elder Hokage frowned once more and clenched his fists against the desk. I know for sure that at least they don't teach jutsu theory at the end of the first year at the academy, Naruto thought. Toby with bitterness. His features softened as he observed Naruto's determined face. At least I know you're not letting them get to you, Naruto-kun. You will accept what they give you and more. The Hokage smiled at Naruto. All right, Naruto, do you need anything else? Sarutobi asked. Naruto rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Well, we'll be practicing Kyuna and shuriken throwing next year, so maybe I need something to help me with that. We'll probably practice taijutsu too, so I'll need a scroll explaining the academy's taijutsu. We will also work more on my story, but I'm not very interested, Naruto informed. Sarutobi arched an eyebrow at the end of Naruto's comment. Don't you care about the story? Naruto-kun, do you know how precious the past is to us? Naruto shook his head, and the Hokage continued. What happens in the past directly affects what happens in the future. For example, if the first Kage had not created the Kagebunsen technique, you would probably still have problems with writing and reading. Do you understand, Naruto-kun? Sarutobi asked. Naruto nodded, but he was still not looking and interested in the story. The elder Hokage sighed. Well, you can learn about all the powerful and impressive techniques created by the ninjas of the past. The Hokage informed him with a sneaky smile. Naruto's eyes lit up as he thought about what the Hokage had just told him. He set out to study history more often. All right, Jiji-san, that's it, Naruto replied with a smile. Sarutobi smiled back at him and nodded. Come back tomorrow, and I'll have everything you need ready, Naruto-kun, the Hokage informed cautiously. Naruto nodded and headed home to wait for the next day. 0. Naruto smiled as he went through his basic jutsu scroll from the 3 academies. The techniques seemed quite simple, and I was glad to have the opportunity to pass the academy. He sighed. While the basic ninjutsu techniques of the 3 academies were very valuable, the history homework was a priority. He took out said task and a scroll with the historical information and started. As he was reading his homework, a question caught his attention. 4. He describes the technique for which the Yodame Hokage was best known. He flipped through his history scroll looking for information, and when he found it, his eyes lit up with interest. Konohagakura's characteristic Yonda and Miokai technique earned him the nickname Yellow Flash and was also the one that changed the course of the Third Great War. Namikaze Minato, also known as the Yonda and Miokai, was the one who created this legendary technique. He named her Irasen no Jutsu for unknown reasons. It was rumored that it allowed its user to travel at the speed of light. Namikaze-sama was known for eliminating large groups of ninjas, enemies in a matter of seconds with this technique. It is still a mystery how the techniques are performed, although it was confirmed that Furinjutsu was the main method for performing the Irasen. Many Furinjutsu specialists have tried to recreate the technique, but all attempts have been futile. Many have stated that the technique implies a lineage limit, but tests were conducted to determine if the Yondaime really had it. And still, the tests came back negative. In the Third Great War, the Iwagakure ninjas were the most feared. As he finished reading, Naruto opened his eyes wide in surprise, and his lips parted in gradual amazement. He silently reflected on the power of such a technique. The description of jutsu was a teleportation technique that used space-time ninjutsu, an art that only a few shinobi in the world could even understand, and even fewer could use it at a good level. That's when he came up with one of the easiest techniques that a shinobi uses, a jutsu that every ninja at the academy knows and uses often. A jutsu that he, Naruto himself, recently learned and read while in his class. From the academy. One day. The Kawarimi no Jutsu. The technique was supposed to replace you with a nearby object. It was a low-level teleportation technique, similar to a technique called Shunsin. It said that it was space-time ninjutsu at its lowest level. But still, it was still space-time ninjutsu, and that's what caught Naruto's interest. A technique that dispersed your body into nothing but chakra, as well as the object with which you wanted to replace yourself. And then, instantly, you were where the other object was. Naruto couldn't help but think about the technique and how it reminded him of the Irasen. It was rumored that the Irasen allowed the user to instantly teleport over great distances. Wouldn't the Kawarimi do the same, except for the possibility of reaching great distances? And the fact that something would be needed to replace it. With that thought, Naruto made himself another promise. Create a jutsu that uses speed and spacetime ninjutsu to the maximum, just like Yondaime. It would be much closer to his dream. To answer some questions, yes, this story will unfold similar to the canon, with the exception of a few things. Naruto won't be as stupid or stubborn as in the canon. He will retain many of the same features, but he will have a calm appearance in battle, and also a serious side. He will grasp the situation quickly and work hard, despite having many of his oppressors against him. I refuse to believe that he doesn't have the intelligence of the canon, especially considering who his father was. In the canon, they said that Naruto's father was a genius, and from what I saw of his mother, well, she didn't seem stupid at all. Naturally, Naruto should have good genes. He won't be a super genius, but he will be intelligent. Although few will know, because people hate or ignore him, and many of his peers will still consider him the last. He'd probably be number one if he had help and wasn't given more work than everyone else. However, in the end, all this will help you. Hard work will give you a deeper understanding of things. Also, there will be pairings, although with Naruto it will be different. I've come to hate Naruto, Bara Hinata pairings, so she won't be your ideal match. I don't really like any other characters with him either, so I'll probably make up my own female character. Or use one of the least watched girls in the series. The reason why I don't like any of the girls who are regularly seen with him is because many of them ignored him, disliked him, or didn't even find him interesting in their youth. If he suddenly becomes popular for his jutsu and then they want him, that's just not right. I'm not going to pair him up with someone looking for popularity or a knight in shining armor or something. Well, that's all for now, it's story time. 0. Chapter 2. Naruto was glad when he opened the door of his apartment. Her first year at the academy was finally over. He would finally have a break from the extensive task he had been given. It was only a month away from the start of the second year, but I was grateful for it. The teachers kept stopping him from getting good grades, but at least he persisted. He would never give up, even if they found blatantly stupid excuses to force him to miss class almost every day. He decided he didn't need to go to class. Most of the teachers were incompetent, and it was never fun to listen to lectures about the Great Wars every day. Naruto decided that he would spend his free time training instead. I was already starting with the 3 basic techniques, especially Kawarimi. He was also consulting his scrolls with information on basic taijutsu and weapon throwing. The concepts and instructions of the scrolls were well explained, and I had a whole month to practice, so everything was going relatively well. Realizing how useful books and scrolls could be, Naruto headed to the ninja library to see if there was anything useful. Of course, he was wearing a subtle disguise, so I wouldn't kick him out. Upon entering, a too big hooded jacket and small sunglasses allowed him to easily get in. I knew I'd never get to read anything of importance above the D rank, but still, I'd probably find something useful. His assumptions turned out to be correct, since he found several books that he assumed would be useful to him. One was talking about the attire of an exemplary shinobi. Another talked about the ideal diet for a healthy ninja. There were a few more, but he didn't have much time before the ninja library closed, and obviously he couldn't get them out, so he decided. Write down some important aspects. He left the ninja library after writing down enough information about what clothes to wear as a shinobi and what to eat. He read in the book about ninja attire that everyone should be an expert in stealth and evasion. He explained that a good ninja should dress in neutral colors and that his clothes should be extremely comfortable to move around. Naruto sighed. He had to get rid of his orange hand. It was quite baggy, and the color was totally opposite to neutral. Naruto headed to the market district in search of clothes suitable for a shinobi. He was planning how he would get into the store when he remembered that he was still wearing the costume. He smiled to himself as he entered the ninja clothing store, and the owner just gave him a welcoming nod. Naruto returned the gesture and went out in search of the clothes he was looking for. She searched for her size and had a little trouble finding something small enough, but she finally found it. When he found something small enough for him, he sighed. It was a dark navy blue shirt with long sleeves and a high collar. It seemed to suit him, and there were 4 of the same behind. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and sighed. He assumed that was enough. It wasn't something he particularly liked, but it would help him integrate better. She went to look for pants, and interestingly, there were about 5 pairs of standard dark navy shinobi pants. That were her size and matched her shirts. 5 shirts and 5 pants. He would spend a little of his savings, but he knew he needed them if he wanted to improve his skills. Naruto bought the clothes and spoke to the store owner in a low voice to enhance his costume. She smiled as she discreetly carried her bags of clothes to her apartment. 0. Soon after buying his clothes and leaving them at home, Naruto went to the market and bought the necessary foods for a healthy diet. His costume triumphed again. As he walked home, he remembered all the times he was kicked out of somewhere and wondered why he didn't dress up then. He shrugged his shoulders. I would definitely use it now, or at least until I learned the Eng technique. When he got home, Naruto put away his food and put on his sleep clothes. It was almost night, and I would need to sleep soon, especially if I wanted to get up early to train. He took out his scroll on the kawarimi and the notes he had already developed. He had come up with some ideas to improve the kawarimi. He recalled his homework on Jutsu's theory and the theory of Saint Insapo of Konoha about how all things, organic or not, have energy and chakra. The man explained that all things have some kind of energy or chakra, and that's why humans could use the kawarimi to replace themselves with those things. Of course, the kawarimi thing was only a small part. The man was trying to prove that all humans have some unconscious way of detecting natural energy or something similar. Naruto didn't pay much attention to the whole natural energy sensing thing, but what he learned about the kawarimi caught his attention. On the scroll containing the kawarimi technique, it was indicated that the recommended object to be replaced was the trunk or branch of a tree. While saying that since Konoha has so many trees, it would also explain why humans use the parts of the tree to replace themselves. Since trees are organic and probably possess the most amount of natural chakra of all the things to replace it with. In the theory, Hirai already stated that trees obviously contain natural energy chakra, due to the ease with which they are used together with the kawarimi. Naruto desperately tried to process all the information in his head and turn it into something. But it became increasingly difficult for him as he read. So, all things contain nature, energy and chakra, and this is how people can exchange with them. He frowned as he read his notes. I needed to find a way to use the kawarimi without swapping with an object. It would be difficult, but I just needed to concentrate. 0. As Naruto put on his fishnet suit under his new long-sleeved, turtleneck dark blue shirt and pants, he couldn't help but smile. His new outfit might not fit perfectly with his tastes, but he felt comfortable. She even felt that she looked a little better in the outfit. She noticed that her hair was getting too long for her to see well, so she took a strand of dark blue fabric and tied it around her forehead. Her hair was still in her line of sight, so she simply decided to move her bangs to the side. Interestingly, his hair never needed anything to help it stay in place. She always moved the way he wanted and usually stayed that way. 0. After the first 2 weeks, with the help of his scrolls, Naruto mastered the 3 techniques of the academy. I was working on performing the techniques without seals, as well as reducing the amount of smoke it produced. It was getting more and more difficult, as every time he tried, it was as if his control lost all technique. The academy scroll mentioned a basic chakra control exercise that consisted of using a leaf and trying to stick it to the forehead, or something similar, so he decided to try it soon. Her control wasn't very good, but she was intrigued by the amount of chakra she seemed to have. He knew from his studies and homework that if a person has a lot of stamina, he probably has a lot of chakra. And the saying was valid for both of them. Naruto felt that he never got tired. He even practiced basic taijutsu and conditioning exercises for more than 7 hours, and was not so tired afterwards. If what I assumed was true, at least according to what I had read, then I had an abnormally high amount of chakra. She wondered if she should ask the Okage, but she knew she couldn't. There was something about it that made things suspicious. Not only did he have huge reserves, but he had huge amounts of chakra inside of him. Sometimes he literally felt how the chakra flowed from him, as if he desperately wanted to escape every time he performed a jutsu. He always missed a lot of it, and wondered how he was even able to execute any technique. However, he could not worry. He had to delve into his notes on the theories of how to alter the Kawerimi. It was close and I could feel it, but I couldn't see it for sure. How do I teleport if I have to change something first? The blonde asked. He could perform the technique successfully, but he couldn't find a way to get through the barrier that teleported him without an object. I could almost make it without stamps, but I couldn't overcome its main problem. He figured he could ask the Okage without revealing too much about what he was really doing. With that idea in mind, he abandoned his previous activities and headed to the Okage Tower. 00. The Okage looked confused at the blonde young man in front of him. Why did I want to know why Shinobi needed an item to exchange when using the Kawerimi technique? Wasn't his name good for that? Saratev, and dismissed it as a childish question, and decided to show his vast knowledge of all the techniques he possessed. And created the Leaf Village. I do not know why you are asking such a trivial question, but I will tell you what I know about the technique, the Okage declared indifferently. Naruto smiled to himself. The Okage was undoubtedly an intelligent man, and, as far as Naruto could see, he knew everything about being a child. Sometimes, Naruto would fall asleep when the older man was talking about his game theory homework. The Okage just talked non-stop about the reasons and the need for chakra shaping, hand signals, and much, much more. He knew so much about everything that Naruto used to come to him when he had any problems with his studies or with being a shinobi. The Okage sighed and adopted a thoughtful pose. The Kawerimi Naruto is a very low-level ninjutsu technique. What can you tell me from what you read on the scroll I gave you about the technique? Sarutobi asked quietly. Naruto's face wrinkled up thoughtfully, and Sarutobi chuckled when he saw his adorable look. Well, it was a short explanation, but it said that the Kawerimi was a space-time ninjutsu at its lowest level. He also said that by using it, our body moves in subatomic chakra particles as well as in the object with which we choose to change. And somehow, we instantly change places with it. I was wondering how we could do that, and I found a theory by a certain Jiraiya. He was saying that all people can unconsciously detect natural energy or something. But I was paying more attention to what he was saying about natural energy related to the Kawerimi technique. He said that it was easier to switch with trunks and other parts of trees because of their abundance of natural energy. And that we unconsciously perceive it, which somehow makes it easier for us to switch, Naruto said while rubbing his chin. The Okage's eyes remained open as he listened to Naruto. Why was the blonde so interested in such a simple technique as to investigate it so thoroughly? Sarutobi was also impressed by Naruto's vocabulary. The young man was almost 8 years old and was already reading about semi-complex jutsu theories. The Okage shook his head in disbelief. The instructors at the academy were assigning him more difficult tasks to try to sabotage the young blonde. And unknowingly they were making him smarter. Saruto turned slightly. All right, Naruto-kun. You've certainly done your research. Well, answering your questions, yes, it's very likely. It is likely that we can detect natural energy unconsciously. And that is the reason why we can use the Kawerimi so easily with parts of trees and other natural elements. However, what that scroll does not mention is that the perception of those natural energies is completely related to the execution of the technique. Naruto arched an eyebrow. Why, Jiji-san? Naruto asked. The Okage smiled. Because, unconsciously, we perceive the energies, and, by shaping our chakra and performing the technique, we find ourselves in the place where we perceive them. In other words, we are attracted by the energy we perceive, and our chakra dissipates into those subatomic particles. In my theory, we are dragged through an invisible vacuum of space, just like the object with which we exchange. I think that, unconsciously, we also connect with the natural energies that we perceive. And this is how we get the object and ourselves to slide through parallel spatial voids. It's actually quite a complex technique if you think about it more carefully. He saluted and became thoughtful. Meanwhile, Naruto was frantically writing down in a small notebook. I was deeply intrigued by what the Hokage was saying, although I didn't understand some things. Like a parallel void in space. What the hell was that? Naruto shrugged his shoulders as he finished writing down what the Hokage had told him. The Sandai watched me amused as Naruto thanked him and quickly left the office. He knew Naruto was a smart kid and hoped others would notice so they could help him. When recalling his conversation with the blonde, he remembered the clothes and the small hairstyle that Naruto sported. The Hokage's eyes opened, wide open upon realizing that Naruto looked exactly like his father. Naruto and I was a little worried. He didn't know why Naruto decided to style his hair like the yondaime, or why he decided to wear the same clothes. Except for Hounen's bulletproof vest, but that worried him. He knew that the villagers probably wouldn't relate to him because of their hatred of the boy, but those who were neutral. Or those who didn't hate him, like the owners of the ramen shop that Naruto loved so much, could. The older generation, who knew what Naruto carried, and didn't hate it, would start to draw logical conclusions. And that wouldn't be good. Sarutobi would have told everyone, even Naruto, who his real parents were if it wasn't for the enemies his inheritance would attract. Naruto already had someone who wanted him, he didn't need more. The Hokage regretted his decision to keep it a secret, but it was all for Naruto's safety. He couldn't tell her until he was at least a Chunin, and even then, he wasn't sure he could reveal the information. The Sandai sighed at me as he rubbed his temples, trying to soothe the headache. I didn't know what to do, and I just hoped people wouldn't start asking questions. Wrong ones. 0. Naruto was enjoying a bowl of hot ramen, while reflecting on what the Hokage had told him. His technique was completely related to natural energy, perceiving energy and emptiness in space. He frowned as he couldn't find any logical connection between the three things. He assumed that he was probably an expert in everything related to the Kawarimi, and that he could impress some instructors at the academy with the acquired knowledge of the technique. But he couldn't let his information become public. With his new understanding of technique, he was much closer to creating it. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he did not notice anyone sitting on one of the stools near him. Humph, what a small world it is, huh, kid? Stated a hooded man near Naruto. Naruto looked to the side and opened his eyes wide. You! Naruto shouted as he pointed his finger at the man next to him. What are you doing here again? The man had fun with the young blonde. Can't you go out to eat ramen? The funny man asked. Naruto's face turned a little embarrassed as he looked away. Hehe, well, Naruto muttered, now embarrassed by his outburst. The man made a gesture with his hand. So you took my advice? He asked indifferently. Naruto's face suddenly became determined, and he nodded earnestly. I don't make jokes to get attention anymore. I'm still not doing well in class, but I've improved, the blonde said. I'm glad to hear that, the hooded man said quietly. Naruto returned to his thoughts as soon as the conversation ended. The man looked at the blonde, now very quiet. He realized that Naruto was deep in his thoughts. He wasn't particularly interested, but he didn't have anything else to do, so he decided to ask the guy what he thought. What makes you think so much, boy? The man asked indifferently. Naruto looked at him confused. Well, I don't know how I'm supposed to perceive something called natural energy. I discovered that people can perceive it, but only without knowing that we do. It's like something we do unconsciously, and I want to know how to do it consciously, Naruto informed without much thought. The hooded man opened his eyes wide. How could this young man even know about natural energy, let alone worry about how to perceive it? I was genuinely surprised. There was more to him than I initially believed. The hooded man smiled under his hood. Then you're lucky, kid, because I know exactly how to do that, the man declared, surprising Naruto. How? How do you feel about it? Naruto asked excitedly. The man smiled smugly. Mum, well, it's not something I can tell you just like that, come, follow me. The man said as he left his money, and Naruto imitated him. 0-0. When Naruto arrived at the training clearing with the man and the man took off his hood, what he saw shocked him. The man looked quite old despite how young his voice sounded. He had short gray hair and a small beard of the same color. His eyes were very narrow, and he had wrinkles that adorned his slightly scarred face. There was a small but visible scar on his right cheek, just below his right eye. The man had dark eyes, apparently of onyx color. And her pupils were hard to see because of her very narrowed eyes. The rest of the man's body was covered by his cape, but Naruto noticed that he was in very good shape, despite his advanced age. The man smiled at the blonde. Hello? My name is Tetakar Yosuke, but you can call me Ryu, the old man informed. Naruto shook his head to sort out his thoughts, and then nodded. Hi, Ryu-san. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, but you can call me Naruto, Naruto replied. The man nodded, and then walked Naruto and himself towards some trees. All right, Naruto-kun, I'm going to teach you how little I know about how to perceive natural energy. Sit in a meditative posture by that tree, Ryu said. Naruto obeyed, and the man continued. Before I start, I'll tell you a few things. I only know how to do this because I am quite skilled with chakra perception and have done a lot of research on this topic. Natural energy has always interested me, and that's why I've spent so much time researching it to find out if I could feel it or use it in some way. At first, I was interested in it because, as you said, I couldn't consciously feel it. For someone with natural perception like me, not being able to perceive the chakra energy was a low blow. A long time ago, I set out to find a way to feel this energy, the man said, as if he were in a cage, talking about the theory of the jutsus. The man was thoughtful for a moment, but then he continued. Shortly after I set that goal and started researching, I came across a man named Jiraiya. Naruto's eyes widened. There was that guy again. This Jiraiya seemed to like natural energy or something, because his name came up every time the topic was mentioned. I talked about some things with him, and somehow the topic of natural energy came up. He asked me everything I knew about it, which wasn't much, and then he told me what he knew. It turns out that, at that time, Jiraiya was learning something called senjutsu with his summoning creatures. Senjutsu is the art of perceiving, balancing, and harnessing natural energy. He taught me the basics of perception, but did not want to go deeper because of the consequences of natural energy, the man reported. Naruto was paying full attention. This senjutsu, or whatever it was very intriguing to him, and he wanted to know more about it. The man paused in his story, but nodded as if confirming something, and looked back at Naruto. There are serious consequences for those who try to take advantage of the natural chakra without proper supervision, Ryu stated seriously. For Jiraiya, his creatures of invocation are the toads. Apparently, they are the only beings who know how to balance and control the natural chakra. Jiraiya told me that, while training with them, they had to constantly monitor him so that he did not lose control of the natural chakra after gathering it. Naruto's interested expression became confused. Control? Naruto asked. The old man nodded. Yes. He told me that I had to feel it first, then gather it, attract it, and finally balance it inside. He had to balance it equally, along with his own physical and spiritual energies. That means he had to balance 3 different energies within himself and then control them in sync. In order to use the nature chakra along with his own, Ryu reported. Naruto was amazed by his explanation. He knew how to balance both aspects of his chakra, and that was already difficult. Balancing a 3rd energy to be able to use it effectively would probably be difficult. However, I was confused because the man said it was super dangerous or something. As if reading his mind, the man began to talk about the dangers. It is dangerous because without the supervision of his toads, he would die trying to balance it. The natural chakra is very powerful and just as unstable. There are many things one must do to learn how to control the natural chakra, and Jiraiya has managed to control it, and learn the methods with the help of his toads. I have never tried to control the chakra because I know from Jiraiya that I would die if I tried, as I have no experience or knowledge of how to control it. Naruto was even more surprised. Who knew that the chakra of nature was so amazing and dangerous? Naruto never thought twice about what the nature chakra could do, but from what the man told him, it was obviously something very powerful. Considering all the dangers one would have to face to learn how to control it, the man sighed and continued, "I'm not sure how you're going to do it. It is very difficult to even perceive the natural chakra. I'm an expert sensitive guy, and it took me almost a month. It was much longer than I ever imagined, but I managed to perceive it. I know you're not sensitive, but I'm sure you can make it if you try hard enough." Naruto nodded determinedly, waiting to figure out what he needed. The man smiled to see her determination. I had no doubt that the boy would be able to. I was sure because the boy seemed so determined. It was unlikely that he would give up. Ryu cleared his throat to give his explanation. To feel the natural chakra, you must first forget about everything. You just need to stay completely still and let go of everything that happens. You should welcome new sensations of all kinds. Don't worry about anything. Focus only on sitting completely still and welcoming nature. You will know it when you feel the energy of nature around you. The feeling will be sharp. If you succeed, you will soon feel the desire to absorb the energy. When that feeling comes, stop whatever you're doing at all costs. You will die if you try to gather the energy inside. I'm not sure if you can do it, because you don't know anything about how to gather alien chakra, but I'm telling you just in case. Do you understand? The man asked after his lengthy explanation. Naruto nodded. He had been taking notes in his mini notebook and knew what to do. Is that all I have to do? The young blonde asked. The man nodded. It's a lot harder than you think, I'm sure, but yeah, that's all I know. I have to go now. I don't really live in Konoha anymore. I'm just visiting my grandchildren. Maybe we'll meet again someday, Naruto-kun, the old man said as he walked away. Naruto stared at the man's back in disbelief as he slowly walked away. Before I could thank him, the man disappeared. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he remembered everything that happened the day before. He knew he was closer to his goal. With that, he began his meditation. Chapter 3, Furuin Jutsu. Frustration. The word defined the predominant mentality of a certain Rubio. He was trying, he really was, but for some reason, he couldn't achieve what he was trying so hard for. Naruto never thought that meditating, of all things, would be difficult. Trying to perceive the natural energy was like being too short to reach the cookie jar on the top shelf and having no other way to reach it, except trying to get it to you with your mind. In other words, at least for Naruto, it was simply impossible. A week and a half had passed and Naruto couldn't feel the natural energy. Sitting around doing nothing, especially trying to stay completely still, was strangely difficult for him. He had even tried to use his newly acquired skill with the simple Kajibun to help each other. He had been trying to replicate the technique from what he saw, and he found out that one only needed to use the Rum's hand signal and expel chakra from the center. It was quite easy to understand, but Naruto was very proud of himself for having achieved it. Despite his achievement, Naruto did not achieve anything with his main goal. He knew that the knowledge and experience gained by a clone returned to the user upon dispersal. That was one of the reasons why Naruto wanted to use jutsu. I knew that he possessed a lot of chakra, so it was a simple decision to try to use his wisdom. Either way, the Kajibunsen technique was probably the best for him. The possibilities were innumerable. Years of trying to perfect your chakra control and learning things simultaneously could be reduced to just a few months. Well, I did find better chakra control exercises and useful ninja reading material. Although he used the few Kajibunsen he managed to create to help him, meditating on each one and immediately dissipating if he felt any sensations, unfortunately it was of no use. He sighed and finally got up from his meditative position. There wasn't much to do. Naruto only had about 4 days until the start of his second year at the academy. He would have to postpone his meditation and concentrate on preparing for his classes. While walking through the busy streets of Kono towards his apartment, without being intimidated by the hateful or suspicious looks he received, he noticed a chunin moving frantically among the people, as if he were in a very big hurry. The man was carrying at least 10 medium-sized scrolls. He was barely holding the load, and his frantic movements weren't helping either. The man didn't even look at Naruto as he rushed past. In the man's haste, he dropped one of the largest scrolls. He didn't even notice the lost weight as he kept running through the bustling streets of Konoha. Naruto saw everything. He shouted at the unknown chunin, but his voice was drowned out by the loud noises of the passing townspeople. Naruto approached the scroll, which people were now surrounding as if it aroused no interest. He sighed as he picked up the rather large scroll and continued on his way home. He assumed that he could deliver it to him or to the courier the next day. Finally, arriving at the apartment where he lived, he had an early dinner and concentrated on trying to continue progressing with his technique. It wasn't much, but I was on my way to achieving it. He went over his notes one more time, as if to perfect his technique. He sighed as he finished reading them all. There wasn't much to do, especially at noon. He put away his notes and got ready for an early bedtime. I had nothing else to do, and I was tired of meditating. Naruto was about to put on his night clothes when the scroll he had brought caught his eye. He had forgotten about the scroll he had found. He came over and put it down on the kitchen table to see what it was. His body tensed with excitement as he noticed the importance level B sticker on the reverse of the scroll. Finally, something not so basic. Naruto wondered if he was right to be so eager to learn things higher than his level, but that thought only lasted for an instant, as his curiosity clouded any rational thoughts he might have had. He opened it cautiously and read the beginning of the first part of the scroll. His eyes lit up, and his mouth drew a wide smile as he read what exactly it was for. On the inner flap, and the first part of the scroll, Basic and Intermediate Fuinjutsu was read. Naruto felt a little guilty, as he had decided that giving it back to him, or to the Hokage, would be a mistake. Actually, he didn't know much about Furinjutsu, but he remembered the first time he read about Yondame's characteristic technique, and how he said it had something to do with Furinjutsu. Naruto desperately longed to learn anything new that would help him become a stronger ninja. The blonde man vaguely remembered that in his historical scroll about the Yondame, he said that he was a master of Furinjutsu. If the Yondame had taken the time to master such an art, it must have been worth it. Naruto wondered why he hadn't heard so much about Furinjutsu. If it was known that Yondai mastered it for me, why hadn't so many others tried it? He didn't have much time to reflect, as Naruto decided that learning this unknown art would have to come first. 0. The answers to Naruto's questions were answered when he finished reading the introduction. The art of stamping was something that took time. When one fights on the battlefield, a ninja cannot afford to simply take out a brush and an empty scroll to start drawing stamps. However, the art was valuable beyond anyone's comprehension. The scroll described how people could create stamps to make almost anything. They could be drawn to create explosives, contain objects, control or absorb chakra, create air displacement or weight, and much more. Naruto knew just by seeing what needed to be done to learn the art that it wasn't easy, but he knew that anything worthwhile would be easy. Naruto could see all the possibilities. No one else had seen them. If used correctly, Naruto knew that the use of the seals, at least for him, would be invaluable. The scroll mainly described intricate patterns and shapes used to form and create stamps. Every line, every shape or pattern, they all had a function. Creating a stamp for any given purpose meant that one had to understand the different uses and purposes of those lines, shapes and patterns. Once you understood that, you had to work on adding your own chakra to the mix, and how to form the lines, shapes and patterns together to finally create a functional seal. It was definitely a strange practice, but if one experimented enough, he would be able to create a stamp for almost anything. After Naruto got through the extensive introduction, finally understanding the uses and applications of the seals, he noticed the time. It was already 2 hours past his bedtime. He was hesitating whether to sleep or stay awake just to read the scroll when he had a little revelation. He slapped himself on the forehead for not having thought of it before. With that, Naruto created a Kajibunzen, injecting it with more chakra from above. Usual for him to survive through the night. The clone already knew his instructions and obediently started reading the scroll, while the real Naruto finished his night routine and settled into bed. 0-0. After Naruto dispelled his clone in the morning after waking up, he felt satisfied to receive all his memories as if he had been the one who had stayed up all night reading the Fuinjutsu scroll. He didn't even feel tired, and yet, it felt like he was the one who had been up all night, even though he technically was. However, he frowned after processing all the information received. Now he knew another reason why most shinobi didn't like the art of sealing. It was undoubtedly a very complex practice. Naruto had a hard time understanding the more complex patterns his clone was reading and their meanings. He got dressed and went to his small kitchen to have breakfast. He had 3 days off, and he knew he had to make the most of them. He had almost finished mastering all the basic kata and postures of the academy on his taijutsu scroll. His weapon-throwing practice still required a lot of work. There was a lot to do. He created another clone and made him stay at home studying and practicing Fuinjutsu, while the real Naruto took his shurikens and kyuna and went to a training camp. 0-0. The training routine was simple. 2 hours of conditioning and warming up to get ready to practice your taijutsu first. He summoned some clones to train with him, though only to help him master the academy's taijutsu. The clones had the same traits and fighting style as him, so it was difficult to improve. Taijutsu training used to take another 2 hours. After taijutsu, he concentrated on weapon throwing. It took him about 2.5 hours throwing kyune and shurikens to feel satisfied. After the weapon throwing, I was going straight to meditation. Naruto used to give up after standing still for about 3 hours. His patience did not last long, and, unlike taijutsu and weapon throwing, he did not advance. I was considering whether to go to the doctor and ask him if he knew what I was doing wrong. Naruto knew it was dangerous. The Hokage was a very intelligent man, and would definitely start making connections. The old man would start investigating Naruto more closely, and Naruto knew that he had the means to do so easily. After all, why did a child want to learn to perceive natural energy? Contrary to what most people think, Naruto is quite reserved. He knew that people couldn't do much with the vague information he had managed to gather, but he wouldn't take any chances. I needed as much advantage as possible if I wanted to be an Hokage. If everyone knew his secrets, it would be easy to use them against him. I had thought a lot about what I would have to do. He had decided that he would need solid countermeasures against all shinobi arts. Now that he had discovered Furuinjutsu, he had a possible way to implement those countermeasures. At least in theory. He needed all his research to remain hidden so that no one could find a way to counter his abilities. 0-0. Finally, Naruto decided to go to the arcade and ask him the question. I would have to formulate it as if it were a common problem. I might ask it like I need some sage advice or something. Usually, the Hokage's weakness was forgetting to try to understand the meaning or reasoning of the questions. If he had the opportunity to share his philosophy. The Hokage liked to talk about that kind of thing and used to get lost in his own beliefs. However, his wisdom was useful, and Naruto often considered him a mentor. Although he considered him more like the grandfather he never had. The blonde man crossed the doors of the Hokage Tower, and the usual routine with the secretary continued its course. Soon, I was in front of the Hokage's desk. The Sandai looked at me curiously at Naruto, waiting for the boy to speak. Naruto remained standing, uncomfortable, trying to figure out how to formulate his question. Finally, he decided to ask the Hokage about his problems with meditation. It simply did not reveal to him the true purpose of his meditation. Hey Jiji-san, can I ask you something? The blonde asked. The Hokage held back a giggle. Well, you already did, but it doesn't matter. What do you want to ask me? The Sandaime asked with a thoughtful smile. Naruto sighed. Well, I was wondering if you knew how to meditate. I try to do it to have more patience and clear my mind, but I can't. I've been trying for a long time, but it's like I can't stop thinking, Naruto said. Sarutobi was a little surprised, wondering why Naruto wanted to be more patient and clear his mind. However, he remembered the hatred that most of the villagers directed at him, and his face took on a solemn expression. The young man was probably trying to distract himself from such things so as not to get carried away by everything. He started to respect the blonde. He was certainly much more mature for his young age than he should have been, Sarutobi observed ruefully. He sighed as he guiltily thought about what the boy never got to have or even to know because of certain dangers that presented themselves. The Hokage interrupted his thoughts to reply to Naruto. The key to clearing the mind is not to force it, but to accept all thoughts as they come. I understand that this may be difficult for you, according to the opinion of many villagers, but in order to achieve true consciousness, to open your senses to the world, to clear your mind, you must accept everything. It is similar to trying to perceive the chakra. Most of the most skilled Hounen can perceive it. It is a difficult skill to learn, but most shinobi can achieve it if they have patience and learn how to do it correctly. Instead of trying to perceive someone's chakra right away, one should open one's senses and accept it somehow. It could be said that one should let the chakra arrive first, and that would be what would allow him to perceive the chakra around him. Later, he could learn to distinguish the characteristics of the chakra and identify people according to their own chakra. The Sandai continued me for a while. It seemed that detecting chakra had many benefits. He went on to explain that if he made the most of the skill, no one was likely to catch him by surprise. Naruto took the knowledge of the elder leader seriously. After all, the experience and teachings of the Sandaime were invaluable most of the time. The young blonde also noticed his problem. Meditating and trying to perceive the natural chakra seemed quite similar, and he had the same problem with both practices. He did not accept the energies of nature. If what Naruto was thinking was true, it seemed that the natural chakra had some sensitivity. The peculiar energy allowed only those who accepted their own problems and weaknesses to feel it. The Sandai told me that everything had to be accepted, and that meant everything. There was a lot to accept in that case. Naruto noticed. I should be a better person, in a way. It was like you couldn't become Hokage unless you really loved the people of Konoha and just wanted to help and protect the village. Naruto's face became fiercely determined after comparing them. His mantra was to never give up, which meant he would do whatever it took. It was bittersweet. Strength and, eventually, possible future acceptance in exchange for doing justice to the villagers. For the mistreatment they had given him. Naruto loved Konoha, but he did not approve of its inhabitants. He still didn't understand why the villagers hated him, and that only made him angrier and resent him more. Naruto took a deep breath to calm down. He had to put that resentment behind him and, in the process, overcome himself. That thought was the only thing he felt would at least give him the assurance that he was over what they did to him, and was willing to forgive them, even if they didn't know it. A faint smile adorned the young blonde man's face. "Thanks for your advice, Jiji-san. It helps me," Naruto replied after the Hokage finally finished his speech. Sarutobi smiled and nodded. "You're welcome, Naruto-kun. It is always a pleasure to have someone who values what I have learned throughout my life. I think you will get far with my help," the Sandaime stated with a proud smile. Naruto returned the nod and the smile and left the tower. 0-0. After returning home, Naruto saw his clone sitting in a circle of loose papers and empty scrolls with marks around him. The real Naruto arched an eyebrow and soon dismissed it. The flood of information invaded him with all its force. His clone had managed to extract quite a bit of information from the basic part of the Fuinjutsu scroll and had started practicing. The clone had learned how to create an explosion using Fuinjutsu and had seen several examples of different explosive tags. The scroll showed the procedure for creating a standard label and how the marks, lines, patterns, and shapes corresponded to each other. It explained how to increase or decrease the time limit by adjusting the length of certain lines, and also how to generate a more powerful explosion by making certain patterns and shapes larger and inverted. Sealing was undoubtedly a very complex art. He used the exploding labels as examples of how the smallest changes to a stamp can have big effects. However, Naruto was pleased. There was a theory of the sealing on the back of the scroll that the clone had found. Naruto arched his eyebrows at another mention of Jiraiya, the Sannin of Konoha. He said that he was a master of Furuinjutsu and that he is still considered one of the best in the world. Naruto remembered the information about Yondaime and that Jiraiya was already his sensei. Naruto knew that if everything he had heard was true, this man must be one of the most powerful ninja in Konoha. He had trained in senjutsu with the Toads, he was a Fuinjutsu master, and, if that wasn't enough, he was the Yondaime sensei. If I remembered correctly, the Sandai had mentioned to me that Jiraiya was also one of his students. Naruto sighed at the thought of that man. He was probably great. The blonde young man stopped thinking about the wise toad and concentrated on more important matters. I now had a basic understanding of the marks used to create stamps. It wasn't much, but something was something. Naruto was also contemplating making his own explosive plates. I wouldn't need them until I was an official genin, but I could probably sell them to the armories. He smiled at the idea of making hundreds of them and selling them. He could transform himself into a businessman and cajole a potential buyer. Now that he knew how to manufacture them, he could add the necessary advantages, making them stronger, and with a higher or lower detonation speed. The next thing I would learn on the scroll would be how to seal and open objects and add chakra. A bit of chakra had to be inserted into the explosive tags for them to initiate their detonation sequence. But it was a bit more complicated when it came to sealing objects. His clone had started explaining how to seal objects when Naruto got home. The blonde quickly created a new clone and made it continue where the other had left off. Naruto didn't care that he probably had to sleep with the noises his clone would make during the night, while practicing how to seal and open objects properly. The purpose was clear and concise. There was definitely a lot to learn with just the basics of Furuinjutsu. But if Naruto had a clone who constantly read and practiced what the scroll said, the real Naruto wouldn't have to do anything. I could learn the art of stamping without even touching an ink brush. The basics of stamping consisted simply in thoroughly understanding the marks individually, and after that, their ability to act when combined in different patterns. There were stamps with huge dies. Brands compiled with one main purpose. Naruto could only imagine how difficult it would be, for example, to create a seal with the sole purpose of somehow preventing someone from being the target of a genjutsu. Naruto didn't know where to start, but he knew that after passing the intermediate level of Fuinjutsu, he would have some idea. He assumed that since genjutsu was direct and consisted of using someone else's chakra to manipulate the senses, he would have to create a seal that would prevent this chakra from entering his brain. I really didn't think I could create a seal that could turn off ninjutsu or taijutsu, but I felt like I could cross that bridge when the time came. With that, Naruto completed his nightly routine, while his clone continued reading and practicing Fuinjutsu, and finally went to bed. 0. The last 2 days of Naruto had gone by pretty quickly. He had continued his training routine with increased intensity, and his progress was slightly better. He felt that he had mastered the taijutsu of his academy, and was confident in the art. The scroll recommended that he develop his own style so as not to be predictable, and Naruto, being Naruto, had taken the advice, and had been looking for a way to fight that suited him. Since he wanted to be fast and use speed, he had been considering creating a style that combined his fighting art with his agility and speed. They had covered the basics of sealing, and Naruto could safely say that he knew quite a lot, at least for a beginner who, technically, had only started the practice 4 or 5 years ago. The blonde felt that he had made progress in his meditation and in the perception of natural energy. I didn't feel any, but for some reason, I felt like I was making it. It could be because, through meditation, he had basically been giving himself therapy. Leaving the pain and feelings of revenge behind and accepting the world and things as they are certainly made him feel much better. He was feeling a little depressed about not having his pride intact, but the sense of accomplishment pushed him away. The blonde young man was happy with his progress. He could proudly affirm to those who considered his ninja education difficult that until then he had achieved it without any help. It was not entirely true, because he had the help of the Sandaime, but he was rather someone who gave useful advice and made Naruto discover things based solely on them. The only real direct help he received was when the Hokage taught him to read a long time ago. It was probably dangerous to brag about what he had learned because of the general hatred for him. Many of the drunkest civilians, and occasionally some drunken shinobi, repeatedly called him a demon or a monster. If he didn't act cautiously, the villagers would start to think that the demon was getting smarter and would probably make some mistake. Naruto sighed as he smiled sadly, remembering to forgive, forget, and accept. This motto accompanied him whenever he felt anger and resentment towards the villagers of Konoha. It didn't take long to get to the academy because he entered his classroom. He arrived on time, as did most of the students. Everyone looked dazed and tired, obviously having their first day back. Naruto walked into the classroom and sat at the back. After a while, the other students arrived. Of the class, and 2 new teachers walked in together. There was a man with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail and a distinctive scar on his nose, dressed in the usual attire of most chunin. The man next to her had shoulder-length white hair and a thin, pale face, and was wearing the same uniform than the first one. The man with his hair up stood right in front of the tired class. He cleared his throat and got most of the attention. "Hello, everyone. My name is Mino Iruka, and I will be your sensei for the rest of your time at the academy. This is my assistant," he pointed to the man next to him, Mizuki. "I hope that the coming years will be fruitful, and that everyone will enjoy my teachings. I hope everyone tries their best." The man took out a piece of paper, a writing utensil, and a notebook for writing. "All right, I'll start the roll," Iruka said. The man continued with the list until he reached Naruto. He narrowed his eyes slightly, but few noticed. Naruto, on the other hand, had been paying close attention, and noticed his new sensei's facial features stiffening slightly. The students heard the name and looked up to where Naruto was. Many of the other students looked at the class clown with surprise. When Naruto took off his overalls and suddenly started acting nonchalantly, although a little serious, the blonde young man looked pretty good considering how he was before. Iruka finished passing list and then, together with Mizuki, she excused herself from the classroom to pick up some things. Naruto noticed the stares fixed on him. I was a little nervous. After all, when people looked at him openly, without disgust or hatred, he could see that their faces were curious. But he did not know why. Finally Naruto got fed up. "Why are they staring at me so hard?" the blonde asked irritably. Many students blinked, but then shrugged their shoulders and stopped looking. The pink-haired young woman, Aruno Sakura, looked a little angry for some reason. "Why are you trying to look cool, Naruto Baka? Stop trying to be like Sasuke-kun," the girl said. Naruto ignored the comment and sighed. He liked Sakura and was never afraid to openly admit it in the class he had with her the previous year. But that had been the year before. He knew now that she was like most other students, and, by extension, the villagers. Shortly after Sasuke entered the academy, his clan was massacred. Sasuke became a melancholic and somewhat arrogant person after that, and his new personality, along with his Uchiha appearance, won him many fans. Sakura had become one sometime at the beginning of the academic year, after becoming friends with Hino, and not long after. The 2 girls stopped being friends due to their simultaneous love for the boy Uchiha. Naruto didn't like Sasuke's acting and had been innocently in love with Sakura. Naruto had often tried to befriend her, but she only berated him and compared him to Sasuke. Naruto didn't hate Sasuke or Sakura, but now he had his priorities defined. He would not fight blindly and stupidly for the love of the pink-haired girl if she only hated him for unfounded reasons. When Naruto didn't respond to her push, the girl got even more irritated. However, the blonde did not mind, keeping her gaze lost towards the front of the classroom. The teachers were quick to arrive, and the first day back at the academy went smoothly. Chapter 4. The harder it gets. Naruto would have never imagined that intermediate-level Fuinjutsu training would be so difficult. The basics of the sealing art weren't that difficult given the circumstances. It was enough to memorize the different purposes of the various lines, shapes, and patterns, as well as the most common situations that happened when combining those marks in certain ways. It was also necessary to understand some basic seals, such as the explosive labels and the low-level containment seals that were placed on the sealing scrolls. It only took Naruto, with the help of a constantly working clone, about a week to master the basics. However, the intermediate level took him much longer. The scroll kept giving him problems to solve. It would show him faulty seals and force him to try and identify the problem. After finishing the first ones, Naruto noticed that, as they appeared, their difficulty increased. The problems within the numerous seals were becoming less obvious and more difficult to locate. Naruto got a little frustrated with this, but he could tell he was getting better. I could look at many of the lower-level seals and easily and instantly identify the problems, or know if they had been drawn up correctly at the time. Some of the more advanced seals gave him problems, but he always overcame them. He was in the middle of his Fuinjutsu training. He still had half of the training left. The second half was about creating one's own seals, as well as some finer details, such as molding chakra into seals, and absorbing it into objects or reducing them to form distinctive shapes. He even explained how to apply stamps automatically using hand signals. Naruto was a little confused as he read that section quickly. It would never have occurred to him that seals could be formed with hand signals. There was something else, and Naruto already knew that he was going to dread advanced Fuinjutsu training. However, the young blonde's determination did not falter at the thought of it. He was about to finish his training, and he had only started half a year ago. The intermediate course was much longer than the basic one. It consisted of most of the parchment and the first half of the course dealt with about 1,000 sealing formulas that had to be solved before the second half of the intermediate course could begin. Even with his clone constantly working to practice and finish it, it had taken him much longer than Naruto ever imagined. On second thought, it was around 970. Sealing problems became disturbingly difficult much earlier. Sometimes it would take up to a whole day for a clone to solve a single problem. There was also no key. The seal had to be reformed so that it was drawn correctly, and then a small amount of chakra injected into it. If it was reformed correctly, it momentarily shone. If not, nothing would happen. Based on everything, Naruto suspected that the first half of the intermediate training was about a month away. He sighed in relief, thinking about how his clone would end up deciphering the annoying sealing formulas. He was glad to have extra time to use his clones, but while he regained consciousness, there also came the annoyance that his clone accumulated while trying to decipher the difficult sealing formulas. Naruto sighed once more as he thought about how his life had gone. His performance in class wasn't much better, but Naruto didn't care. His absences from class turned out to be an excellent time to train. He had perfected his aim to perfection if the object did not move. His taijutsu training also paid off. He had not yet developed a definite fighting style, but he still mastered martial arts and could defend himself effectively if necessary. At least I thought so. The blonde young man had also managed to master the leaf chakra control exercise, no less than in the first few weeks. His meditation was a delicate subject, but also very useful. It definitely calmed him down and allowed him to put things in perspective. I couldn't feel the natural energy, and I knew why, but unfortunately I had no way to improve it. His problem was to stay still. He needed to learn methods to consolidate his concentration and hold it firmly so that he could sit completely still. However, he was content to go slowly and find ways to make it work gradually. The idea behind meditation had a lot to do with patience, and feeling the natural energy was no exception. While Naruto was pondering, a chakra signal was noticed outside his door. I hadn't mastered chakra perception yet, but I was getting there. After the Hokage explained the benefits to him, it seemed to him that he should learn another skill. So he experimented and followed the instructions of the Sandaime, and indeed, while meditating, he felt a distant pain in the shoulder. When Naruto looked over his shoulder, which was angled towards his apartment window. He saw what looked like a chunin jumping between buildings. At first, he was puzzled, but then he realized that his meditative training, unknowingly, was also trained for the perception of chakras. He was glad that he had come this far, but he was also annoyed that he could not achieve his main goal, to perceive natural energy. Anyway, at least I was making progress. Suddenly, a few knocks on the door put him out of his thoughts. He knew that the person intended to go specifically to his apartment. His chakra seemed to be getting closer, while Naruto was waiting for them. The blonde young man quickly gathered up all his desired material and the scroll, and hid it just in case. Technically, I wasn't supposed to have the scroll. Naruto went to his door and cautiously opened it. He knew that there were people who hated him, and it would not be unworthy of some of them to try to hurt him. Although the Okage had set as an example those who did try, so